everybody, welcome to the Healthtech Pigeon podcast, bringing you the top health tech news stories and analysis every single week. Today, I am joined by Jessica and Adam at producing. Welcome, Jessica. How are you doing?
I am doing very well, thank you. I feel like we're in the middle of some exciting political times. We've been in limbo, waiting to see what the budget brings this week. We now know, sort of, waiting for details, I guess. And then next week, obviously, we've got the US elections. So, gosh, so much to talk about, so much to be excited about, I suppose. How about you? How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm all right. Yeah, it's all budget at the minute. Yes, lots to talk about. Lots of entrepreneurs getting a little bit upset, and yeah, lots of opinions to share. We obviously have a lot of connections in that world, and yeah, I think anyone looking to potentially sell a business isn't particularly happy. And similarly, I think the knock-on effects of what it means for how this government perceives innovators. I don't know, people are drawing a lot of lines, aren't they? But I guess we're going to get into it a bit more and talk about it. But yeah, why don't we kick in to the first story this week, which is obviously, well, we'll pick on the sifted coverage, the headline being "A Kick in the Teeth or Necessary. The UK tech sector reacts to tax hikes and exit relief scheme changes in the budget." So as we all know, Rachel Reeves has announced plans to raise 40 billion quid through tax and changes to capital gains, changes to national insurance, which affects employers, and yeah, entrepreneurs relief or business asset disposal relief, is it called? The proper name for it. Lots of changes anyway. But Jessica, what are your thoughts? Who have you been speaking to? What have they been saying? Give us the vibes.
Well, I think it's fair to say, as with most budgets, to be honest, it's drawn a fair bit of criticism. It was positioned as a budget of growth and investment, but recognising that with that comes some pain in some places. But ultimately, the aim is to right the wrongs of the government that we've had for the last, how long have they been in power? How long were the Conservatives here? Like 15 years, something like that. Long time. But that's nearly half my lifetime. Jeez. Met with criticism. I think it was probably, well, it was definitely expected to be met with criticism. It also appears to be a budget of two halves in many respects. I think it's worth for us in health tech looking at it as a kind of budget of two halves, where we consider implications for innovation, for entrepreneurs, and for companies who are doing incredible things to change healthcare and life sciences. And then also on the other side, looking at exactly what has been committed for healthcare and for life sciences and research and all of that kind of thing. And it feels a little bit in some respects like giveth with one hand, or rather taketh away with one hand and giveth with the other. So I suppose just to give you a rundown of the innovation, the tech side, and why lots of people are up in arms. A summary, as you say, James, is that national insurance is going to increase. It's actually a reversal of a reduction that we had in national insurance. So it's going to go back up 1.2%. And it's twofold. So the other part of that is the threshold from which employers have to start paying national insurance from drops from 9,100 to 5,000. So that means that for every employee that a company has, the employer will have to start paying national insurance from after the first £5,000 of somebody's salary rather than the first 9,100. The nuance there is that there is an allowance made for small companies, which you would hope that actually a lot of companies in our space perhaps would be protected from, given that we are sort of in the startup, scale-up space predominantly, which actually increases that allowance from 5,000 to 6,000. And according to Labour's maths, that actually means that about 850,000 small businesses actually won't pay any national insurance at all. And over 1 million will pay the same or less. So that threshold, that additional threshold, is available to companies who pay less than £100,000 in national insurance. However, it's worth considering that, there's going to be a high call round, and particularly when you think about venture-backed companies who have, it's hard raising at the moment, and companies are already looking at how they extend their runways. That's going to be an additional chunk of money that they're going to have to consider. Where does that come from? Obviously, hope that they're bringing in additional revenue as well, but that is going to come into force from April next year, which really gives 6 months for companies to figure that out and close that shortfall. The other part of this is relates to capital gains tax, as you said, James. So ultimately, the base rate of capital gains tax, so that's for earnings on the sale of assets under $1 million, is going to rise 8% from 10% to 18%. And then for anything over 20%, anything over $1 million, it will rise from 20% to 24%. So that's an increase of 4%. The other side actually of that capital gains piece actually affects investors more than it affects innovators. And that is the capital gains tax on carried interest. So for those of you who may not know, ultimately, general partners of investment firms, so that can be private equity, it's VC, it's hedge funds, they are often entitled to a share of the profits that venture capital, any funds receive, they're entitled to a share of the profits. And at the moment, the tax on those profits is set at 28%. There were concerns that was going to rise in line with income tax. So the higher rate of income tax, you're looking at obviously 45%. That has raised from 28% to 32%. So whilst not optimal, it's not as bad as perhaps people were expecting. And I think it's worth remembering that there's been rumours floating around for the last couple of weeks about what might be expected in this budget. I think that was very intentional. I think that was probably some intentional leaking from the government themselves to test the waters a little bit, but also so that when they came out with their budget, it wasn't quite as bad as people were expecting. And chatting to the team from Keller's new Healthtech fund that it is being raised at the moment, it was really useful and interesting, I think, to get their perspective on it from that, I guess, investor level, which was that whilst uncomfortable, it's definitely not as bad as it could have been. And speaking to that point about rumours circulating and ultimately the budget coming out perhaps in a slightly better place than was expected, there was potential discussion around whether or not capital gains tax would be increased in line with income tax. So not just on carried interest, but for the sale of any companies. So for entrepreneurs, for anyone who has shares in companies or share options, that could be pretty significant. And when you think that entrepreneurs relief was already reduced from 10 million down to 1 million, most companies that are sold in this space are going to be over and above that 1 million mark. So the amount of tax implication there could be huge. And that isn't just for founders, as I say, that's for early hires, people who have invested time and energy into those companies to see them grow and thrive. I guess the other side, or the giveth side, is that apparently there's going to be up to, and I think that's interesting language, up to 520 million investment into life sciences from the industrial strategy. As with all of these things, details yet remain to be shared. There's also 40 million in proof of concept funding that will be available to support research from universities and academia into commercial propositions. And then a further 5.8 billion has been committed for the National Wealth Fund, which exists basically to increase investment into industries of the future. And you would hope that we fall in that space. So I guess that's kind of the first half. James, I don't know if you've had any sort of reflections on what that might mean for other founders. And
so I have a lot of thoughts and also I have no thoughts. It's just a strange dichotomy. Like, okay, the thoughts I do have, we're in health and we're in tech, we're in health tech. So this budget simultaneously, on the health side of it, you look at what they've said, 22 billion. Sometimes it's reported as 25.7, but on gov.uk, 25.7 billion over this year and next for the NHS. I find with budgets like this, there's just these numbers that you just get so like drowned out by like these numbers that are in the millions and billions, and like it doesn't really mean much to me until you sort of think, okay, well, how is this going to actually change something? So let's start with the health stuff. All right, 25 billion, okay, whatever. 3 billion difference, that would be nice, even if you had that as an individual. But anyway, whatever, some amount of billions. 1.5 billion for new surgical hubs, which builds capacity for 30,000 additional procedures. 1.25 million additional diagnostic tests. Okay. 70 million. So now we're in the million, not billion, but 70 million to invest in new radiotherapy machines to improve cancer treatment. Nice. Over 2 billion for NHS technology and digital improvements. 600 million to increase in local government spending. 26 million for mental health crisis centres. Okay, forgetting the numbers. Mental health crisis centres, great. Local government spending to support social care, great. NHS technology and digital improvements, great. New radiotherapy machines to improve cancer treatment, great. Surgical hubs, great, I think. Additional diagnostic tests, which use CT or MRI, okay, great. So look, on that healthcare side, ideal. That sounds excellent. And I'm sure there are devices companies, there are going to be software companies, there are going to be, there are a lot of health tech companies that are going to benefit from a lot of that, you would hope, if indeed that money then goes into systems that support that innovation. But it was interesting because I had a call yesterday with a health tech company that has been in the space actually for quite a long time, probably 8 or 9 years now. And they were asking me what I thought about, this and this flood of extra money from the top, an extra 20 something billion. The budget, I believe, is just over 100 billion. So, an extra fifth added in. And it's funny because I likened it to if on like a Friday or Saturday night, if you're happy anyway and you have a load of beers, you'll get happier. If you're sad anyway and you have a load of beers, you'll get sadder. And actually, I wonder, what system is this money going into? What philosophies does that system have? What ability does that system have to utilize that new money that you're then going to throw all of this in? So what direction is all this going that we're going to accelerate things? Or is this money being spent to change those directions? So the line in this that I like on the government website is where it says over 2 billion for NHS technology and digital improvements to increase productivity and save staff time. That at least points to some money being spent on system change. Because the thing that I think most innovators know on the ground floor is that until the aversion to risk improves or changes, really the amount of things that actually get done won't really change. And yes, okay, there might be more money to spend on, I don't know, Samsung or the really big companies with CT and MRI scanners. Okay, great. But is this really going to change the system to create a vibe of more improvement at that startup health tech level? And I don't know. I don't know how much this will do that. I just hope that it will. I just hope that part of this is going towards changing the system because, again, I'll reiterate the point. If you throw more money into a system that is not very good at utilizing that money, that is already not very good at promoting new technologies and moving from pilots to full-time contracts and creating some stability for those health tech companies and startups, and unless that changes, then I worry about the money being put in. So that's, I guess, my first look out. On the tech side, or call it the startup side or the business side, yeah, it's not a budget that particularly points to seeing entrepreneurs and starting businesses as a priority. I would probably add to that right now. I think a more Labour government has been elected, a more Labour government is always going to lean towards the side of, they define it as those that are working, in inverted commas. But I guess what they mean by that is workers, not owners. And if you do own a business, or you own part of a business, you're an owner as well as a worker. You stand to benefit from owning the shares. The counter to that from the tech side is always going to be around risk. It's always going to be around, well, those are the people that take risk. If you incentivize those people to take risk for disproportionately large returns, they will take disproportionately large risk. And that is, in part what drives capitalism. And that's what has led to all of the innovation and change that has propelled us thus far. It's then up for debate that raising capital gains, which, is the tax that you pay when you sell your shares, when you sell your business, etc., is a rise of 4% going to materially change the amount of risk being taken? Is it going to materially change the amount of startups being formed? Is it going to materially change the amount of reward people will feel? Is it going to materially change much, or is that going to raise the money that's needed to improve public services and all the rest of it? And so that kind of takes me to where my mind goes whenever a budget like this is released, which is that I think it's very easy for people, and of course it's easy for people, I have a lot of sympathy for this. Everybody just looks, how does this affect me? How does this affect me in a very short arc? People just draw the line in the shortest way possible between this budget and how does it affect money in my pocket at the end of this month and the end of next month, and the end of this year. People draw that line very quickly. What I try and think about is, okay, well, how does this budget affect everyone and everything? How does it affect the country? What does the country look like in 4 years' time? And therefore, how does my lifestyle overall look in 4 years' time? What does that look like for my potential child on the way in December when they grow up in 18 years' time? And so I like to think about that stuff, and I like to try and think like, what sort of world does this create? Because if, drawing an extreme argument, if you have a more centrist or more left-wing government in, and hypothetically they go a long way to restoring public services and public health and community health services and community services more broadly, and let's say you have a far more community driven world in 8, 12, 16 years or whatever, like, would I take an increase in capital gains to 39% if I'm just happier overall? Well, of course, because I'm happier overall. And so there's always this for me, which is that I think as people that are privileged enough to put food on the table and to have a lot of extra beyond that, I think it's worth just taking your mind somewhere that thinks, okay, what world does this create, at least in the short term? But again, the entrepreneurs, if you're more right inclined and you exist on that side of the political spectrum, you will genuinely believe in your heart of hearts that a more conservative approach of rewarding risk-taking and entrepreneurship and that more capitalist side, you're going to believe in lowering taxes and going down that route in order to increase the overall size of the pie for everyone. So it is just a case of philosophy, I guess. But I try and think about all of those things. So you're right. With one hand it gives, with the other it takes away. But like, how much does it take away? How many people does it take away from, really? Like, what situation are they in life, and for how long? And by the way, I'm in that category. I'm in that category that I have to pay more national insurance. I have to look at the exit plan of SomX and go, well, if we do exit, like, this is what capital gains will look like now. And it's very easy to say, well, yeah, I'm going to be this amount worse off potentially. I'm definitely going to be this amount worse off because of the national insurance. I might have to do this and that with pricing and but look, these are economists that have gone through all of this. These are changes that are in some regard expected. And like, yeah, there's a lot that swims. There's no single answer to any of this stuff, but I that gives you an idea for sort of how I think about this. And there's a lot that I think about.
Yeah, it's a super interesting point, I guess, that also, so much of the UK economy is also built upon small and medium-sized businesses. And I wonder if that's also why we're seeing as much frustration perhaps communicated from the people that we're surrounded by, definitely, but generally from in response to this budget, because I do think that it's generally felt that the impact of this is going to be on those small and medium enterprises rather than the big corporates. And fundamentally, those big corporates, whilst there will be some pain, generally they can weather most storms. And it's not Healthtech, but there's obviously big uproar from the farming community in the context of actually what these changes in capital gains tax mean for the future of farming, even, and what that means in passing on, farms and all of that kind of thing, and through family, and that could be significant. So I do understand. I do understand the pain of it, and I think it's hard to offset that against the bigger picture, because ultimately it is going to make some people's lives harder, especially in those businesses where they're having to make difficult decisions. And actually, it might make hiring harder, or it might make holding on to staff harder potentially, because whilst a lot of these decisions have been put in place to protect the working people, ultimately things like this rise in national insurance is going to have a trickle-down effect onto people who are employed, where potentially they're not going to get the bonuses or the promotions and the pay rises that they were expecting, perhaps when they're expecting them, or the size of that they're expecting. So there is that kind of consequence too. But the money does, I suppose, have to come from somewhere. And I also had, building on that, some of the comments I relayed from the Keller's team as well. I think two of the things that have come through quite strongly is that this doesn't paint the UK as an economy that wants to light a fire under innovation and entrepreneurialism and support people who are making a difference to build businesses, and that actually they may explore going to other countries to do that. And also there's an interesting discussion around what it might mean for M&A potentially. I think there will also be impact on what this means in how easy or hard it is to raise investment. But the kind of perspective from David and Laurent was actually that whilst uncomfortable, this isn't as bad as it could have been, and actually it still leaves the UK as a more favourable economy to start a business and to run a business than other European countries. Obviously, the US is really in flux until, we don't know the outcome of the election next week, but it won't be until some months after the election where we really know what the impact of that election will look like, and whether or not in some states or as a nation, the US becomes more favourable or less favourable for entrepreneurs. And I think on the M&A side, my question was, I'd seen a few people talking about whether or not this means that people who have already started down that journey of moving towards acquisition might expedite the process to try and sort of beat the deadline of was it April 5th, 2025? And actually the feeling was that probably wouldn't be the case, because to my earlier point, the biggest increases for earnings under $1 million, and actually in most cases earnings are going to be over $1 million, and that 4%, whilst painful, is not as big as it could have been. But actually in either whether or not a company then looked to set up an entity abroad, or whether or not they perhaps pushed through an acquisition more quickly, both of those things could trigger a tax event for them, and the outcome could still be, relatively unfavorable from that perspective. So in the grand scheme of things, actually that rise of 4% probably wouldn't drive acceleration of that activity ahead of April. So we're unlikely to see, this rush of new acquisitions being announced before then. But, that's not to say that there won't be some that are.
It's why it was a good number to choose. It's a good number to choose to go up, because, as you say, it's not going to wildly affect anyone's decisions. It's just going to be slightly irritating for people that are now going to take 3.8 rather than 4.5 million or whatever it is. Like, and a Labour government is going to go cry me a river. Like, and are they wrong saying that in that scenario? So I think that's the thing. The other thing you've got to remember with this sort of stuff as well is that you can dress it up in it's capital gains tax rise of this, it's national insurance this, it's inheritance this, it's da-da-da. If you're growing a business, at the end of the day, you've got to be an entrepreneur about it, and you've got to go, all right, the goalposts have changed. What do we need to do? All right, we've got an extra 100 grand of costs on our P&L. We need to change pricing. Oh, that's going to mean that these two are probably going to leave, and we're going to have to do these things. Okay, we'll just do that. All your competitors are going through the same thing. So everyone's now going through the same thing. So if this is the new environment now, this is how you've got to back yourself. And in health tech, that's just where we are. I think the thing is as well is, it was interesting what you said actually about how this affects investment, because you're right. If it's affecting how the people who run the VC funds are taking their carry, so if they're being taxed more heavily on their carry and all those things, again, part of me is like, cry me a river. If you're over your hurdle rate and then you're just talking pure upside, so over your hurdle rate basically means like you're over the amount that you now only need to pay, you're only allowed to pay back the investors in the fund. You're now into the zone of profit on the fund where you're starting to take money. So, okay, you're over your hurdle rate and now you're being taxed extra on your carry. That is exactly what the Labour government is trying to do here. They're taxing the people who are earning millions. So, like, I don't think that materially, I mean, is this controversial? I don't think that materially changes people's appetite to start a VC fund. It's just a slight irritant on people that are about to be extremely wealthy in a single cash event. Is that going to change the expectations on multiple? No, because it's 4%. It's 4%. It's a few percent. And people are like, they're just going to invest in the startups and they're going to expect those startups to do 100x, growth and all the rest of it. So it's not going to materially change anything. That seems like quite an accurate tax on what they want to do. Tax the people that are earning millions, right? Like, that seems like they're executing on exactly what they want. I think the thing with what's happened with the budget a lot of the talk and the media storm around it, people that you've seen on, like, coming on LBC, like that guy from I think like a hairdressers union and all that sort of stuff, that like there's been a lot of friendly fire. Labour they've been quite clear. Like, we want to be smacking tax on the people that can afford it, the businesses, the people at the top end. It's just that there seems to have been some friendly fire. And I think that's what we're trying to talk about here in health tech. Like, where's the friendly fire on this? Like, I don't think in an ideal world, you're not trying to stifle innovation. You just want to, tax the rich, tax people who can afford it, tax people that have been avoiding it, like all that sort of stuff. I guess what we're trying to do is identify where the friendly fire is. I don't think VCs being taxed on carry is one of those areas personally. So like, I don't think that's going to materially change anything other than collect tax dollars, pounds in this instance. And the other one is desperate times, desperate measures. Like that, again, that's been the argument. The argument is like, we're in a hole and we need to find the money here. And actually, if people at the top end are having to pay more, they're going to have to pay more. And like, yeah, as I say, it's just the question here, I guess, is how much friendly fire is there and how much is this materially going to change things? startups are going to have to do something different. They're going to have to change pricing. But if these small percentages have flipped you into the red and are going to really put you out of business and that kind of thing, then I guess it's a different category that I know less about.
I think, like, along with all of this kind of thing as well, like, it's clearly a really emotive topic, and emotions drive people and humans, and you don't want to spark panic, because that panic also has consequences. We saw it way back with SVP, for example, where you had founders pulling money from SVP because of the rumours that were circulating around the stability of that bank. And I think, again, you don't want to spark reactive decision making that then have negative consequences. And we know, again, repeat it multiple times in any given episode, that it's hard to raise right now. We don't want the market to shift, or market trends to shift in such a way that it influences perhaps a further reduction in valuations and that kind of thing as well, which, for example, if you were to be pessimistic about the reactions to M&A, for example, with capital gains tax, if you have a lot of people then rushing to try and sell their company quicker, that is going to push valuations down, and that's going to have a much longer than 6 months impact on the industry and the economy. So I think it's a really tough one to navigate. But the other thing to remember as well is that this budget is only living for 1 year. So we're going to have another budget in 12 months' time, which could be better, it could be worse. The intention, I suppose, is that this budget comes in and it puts us in a better position so that they can make more happy announcements next autumn that people do feel more comfortable about. We've seen the impact of those tough decisions, but this isn't a single budget for the entire tenure of this Labour government. This is the first budget that we're going to see over a 5-year period, and things change quite quickly. We only have to see what happened with the Conservatives, where you don't even know who your Prime Minister is from one given day to the next, let alone what the intention is and decisions around the economy and what that's doing to the economy. So I think the other thing we can perhaps take from it is that, whilst painful in some places and uncomfortable for some people, actually going through a period of stability. And I don't just mean in the UK. There's been 9, I think, government elections around the world in the last year, which is pretty unprecedented. That hopefully, actually, if we can have some stability from a political perspective and exist beyond the flux that we've been in for definitely the last 12 months, if not longer, that actually it helps things move forward and things do start feeling better. But I guess the other thing that I do want to chat about a little bit more is from the health perspective and the giveth rather than the taketh away, and some of the questions that have been raised on that. And as you said, you quoted some big numbers there, and I think that, like 27 billion or whatever it is the culmination of all of those smaller pots that kind of come together. And I guess that the big questions actually are around how much of this budget has also been committed. Definitely where, to your point, we have an inefficient system, and throwing a huge sum of money into an inefficient system means huge inefficiencies. So how much of that in real terms are we going to benefit from? But considerations like the agreement that has recently been reached for resident doctors, not junior doctors, important to say, resident doctors now, pay rises, etc. How much of that has been accounted for outside of this budget, or does that 22.6 billion include, the money that has been put aside for that? And again, as with all budget announcements, we're getting the headlines, we're not getting the detail. And so much of this, I think, before we make any real decisions or come to any real opinions on it, we do need to see the detail and the plans. And I don't think it's any coincidence that, only last week or the week before, we were talking about this new NHS 10-year plan and the public consultation around shaping what the NHS looks like. And I almost think that a lot of the detail for how this money is going to be spent is going to come out of that, despite the fact we know that that plan has been formulated already, and will be further informed by the perspectives of the consultation. We know what some of those headlines are. I think we can make assumptions about how some of this money is going to be spent, but they are assumptions at the end of the day until we get more detail around those plans. And I think we've had a new government and then a budget come in quite quick succession, so it's been very difficult to really ascertain really what that is going to mean practically and how that's going to feel in a tangible way to anyone.
Yeah, I think the positive though is obviously that they are headlines, they're not the detail, but actually it's leadership in action, and it's showing where the attention is, it's showing where intention is of this government, and 22 billion to the NHS signals great intention. And I think at least it's not the opposite. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think that is certainly a positive. And there's been the words digital, technology, devices, all of these things have been said. So yeah, if we are looking for the positives, it's that the intention of this budget certainly is in so many places that we would want it, and we're not having to sit here saying, where's the chat about digital, where's the chat about tech, where's the chat about innovation? Like it's all actually there. So that is extremely positive. So at least the intention's there, and we can hopefully help them with the detail.
100%. And I they've not been backwards in coming forwards about the fact that digital and technology underpins so much of this. There are three key pillars that are continually repeated, and that's community, prevention, and digitization. And arguably, community and prevention really needs to be underpinned by technology and other things too. Technology is not exclusively the answer, but we live in a tech first, digital first world. So clearly that is going to be fundamental to this. So it is encouraging to see that, they're being really clear about their intentions there. And those intentions surely must add up to action and investment. And that detail will become clear. It's probably also worth, for our listeners, sharing some of the perspectives that we've been gathering across our network and our community, so that you don't just have to listen to James and I sharing our own opinions and our take on the budget. Other people are eminently more interesting than we are. But some really interesting takes here. So Stephanie Murta, who's co-founder of Kavanagh Health, she actually is really encouraged by the $500 million that's been committed to the life sciences sector. And actually, I guess it's more than $500 million if you think about, the additional millions that are coming for concept funding and, potentially even for dipping into that National Wealth Fund, etc. But yeah, she's broadly encouraged by what that might mean for the life sciences sector, and that there has been that intentional focus, but ultimately agreeing with us that the long-term effects of these higher taxes and its influence on the economy and the other factors that might influence the economy, we are just going to have to wait and see how that unfolds over time. But she is positively encouraged by focus on life sciences and healthcare, and clearly there is, in no uncertain terms, are the Labour government looking to fix the health system as we know it. So that's definitely one of the more kind of positive perspectives, and that sentiment is broadly shared by others, including Gemma, who is from Olus Medical, Gemma Cholaton, and also really welcoming of that increase in spending for the NHS, but questioning of that detail and wanting to really understand how that translates into better support for healthcare professionals, because we do have healthcare professionals leaving in droves, doctors, nurses, allied health professionals. We're seeing this real exodus from the NHS. So where are we going to get that extra resource and support? Where are we going to find those extra people, and how do we make the NHS a space where they do want to be?
So this is a really important point, actually, the way that Gemma's phrased this. We can't magic more doctors and nurses out of nowhere. They've been leaving the NHS in droves. How the budget translates into support for healthcare professionals is unclear. That's a really, really, really important point. Because if you work in healthcare and you work on the ground floor, if you are a clinician or you're close to the ground floor or management side, you know this intuitively, you know this instinctively, that throwing more money into a situation does not grow humans. It does not grow healthcare professionals. And you know, if you're close to the ground floor, that's what the ground floor needs. So actually some ideas as this budget emerges and that bit more flesh on the bones, like it'd be interesting to see how much is around workforce, how much is around working conditions. Is there going to be a financial incentive for trusts or for other locations being very geography specific? Is there going to be a financial incentive maybe for them to create good workforce conditions? If it was me, what put a fund associated with the staff survey. If you get a great staff survey, you get more money. Actually drive people to create good working conditions for people. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I would agree. And a perspective from everyone's favourite AI regulatory megaphone, Hugh Harvey from Hardy and Health. He, again, is pretty pragmatic about, he hasn't really talked about healthcare specifically, but really what it means for businesses, and actually is welcoming of the fact that the extra allowance that is accounted for in the national insurance rise is fair and helps balance out that 1.2%, and is happy to see that there's no change in corporation tax or dividends for the time being. It's worth noting that income tax, which includes dividend tax, will continue to be frozen until 2028 or 2030. I can't remember which one, at which point they will review it. And also happy to see that there is no change in the BADR lifetime limit. So that overall is good news for people looking for an exit, despite those increased rates of tax, at that point. And then slightly different perspectives then coming from biotech. So Luke Bateman from Antiverse has concerns that perhaps the capital gains tax might make fundraising more challenging, since the investors are going to benefit less from their investments. I mean, that speaks to a lot of what you said earlier, James, and I think a lot of investors talk a good game about impact investing and how healthcare takes longer, and you're not just doing it for the financial payback. And potentially this is an opportunity for investors to really kind of, put those values into practice and support their portfolio companies, as they would anyway, I'm sure, but to kind of put their own personal, recognizing the impact to them personally, being able to perhaps take a pragmatic approach to that. I don't actually necessarily think it disincentivizes investors from investing, because the rate is the rate is the rate. You can't really do that much about it, but it would be interesting to see how it may affect investor behavior.
Yeah, I think it would be super interesting to survey a load of VC. Let's be specific. I think it'd be really interesting if you surveyed a load of VCs now and asked them, is taxing your fund profits, so is taxing your carry slightly more going to affect your fundraising behavior? And I think a lot of them would say yes, because they'd be wanting to signal that they're upset that they're being taxed higher. I think then if you actually looked at it in 12 months' time and analysed their investing behaviour, my suspicion is that it might be exactly the same. And they're just being taxed more. And that would actually be proof that it's exactly what the Labour government wants to do. If you did, though, look at it in a year's time and it had affected their fundraising, it might affect the amount they've deployed this year. It might affect the types of companies. It might affect the For example, they might choose a particular business model. They might go more safe. They might demand higher revenues at Series A, Series B. They might change their metrics. So there's lots that could change. I think it'd be really interesting to ask them now if they think it would change, what they think it would change, and then to look at it in a year's time to see what it did change. That study would then be incredibly powerful to figure out what would be the implications of this for future tax rises or indeed future tax reductions, with actually some evidence behind it. Because I'd actually love to do that piece of work, in all honesty, because I think you'd then get, I mean, you could look at it, I suppose, historically. You could look historically now at like, okay, if when capital gains has increased and, carried interest has been taxed higher and VCs have had less upside at company exit or fund exits and all that sort of stuff, what has it actually changed? You could look historically. But in the modern world with SaaS business models and ridiculously large exits of companies driving entire funds and all this sort of stuff in software, I think it'd be a fascinating piece of work to do, because you'd learn some stuff of how to tax it appropriately, and if you wanted to drive certain things, you could change taxes accordingly with a bit more evidence rather than it being so emotive and speculative.
I think that is the thing with this, that actually being able to have that level of insight would be so interesting, and I think also help create a much stronger narrative around some of the decisions that are being made at governmental level. I guess as a call to action there for anyone who's interested in carrying out that research, either please do, or give James a shout. And
I'd love to be part of that. I'd love it. I'll interview them. It's fine.
Well, we've got a podcast to talk all about what the results of that survey look like. So get in touch. Cool. Well, just to move on to a couple of final thoughts, Luke also raised concerns that the increase to employer national insurance means that obviously that means companies incur more costs for their employees, which is definitely challenging for particularly biotech and life sciences companies who are pre-revenue or in the early stages of bringing in revenue, and therefore relying on the budgets that have been put together based on funds that they've raised, whether from venture capital, angels, or otherwise. So I can completely sympathize with those pressures and those frustrations, because ultimately it's going to be harder to bring in talent, I think. And I guess for startups, smaller companies competing against corporates, again, corporates are going to feel the pain a bit less, probably much less, to be honest. And so you're battling against a package that a corporate can provide versus what you're able to provide, and that might be impacted by this increase. So I can really identify with some of those worries, and why that feels not great, in his words, for biotech and life sciences in particular. And then to round out with a very, very clear position from Quinn Wills,
cheerful ending,
of Oka Bio, who says, in a predictable shift on capital gains, business asset disposal relief and carried interest, our government has sent a clear message that this does not prioritise our innovators, our risk takers, and our global position within transformative industries. With the US leaving the UK far in the dust of unicorns, I'm curious to see how vague promises of research investment will offset our best and brightest crossing the pond. And you know what? That's actually also a really fair point, because I talked earlier a little bit about some perspectives on businesses crossing the pond and how this might influence that. But we didn't talk about how that might also influence talent crossing the pond, whether that's to the US or whether that's to other countries as well, where they again may be able to access a far more attractive employment offer, lifestyle, whatever it might be. And I do think maybe it's a leap, I'm not really sure, but when you think about STEM careers in particular, they're really niche spaces and not easy to hire into. And then when I think again about hiring a diverse cohort of people and making sure that what is traditionally not a very diverse space becomes increasingly diverse, if it is looking increasingly less attractive to enter into those spaces, and that it looks better in other countries, the consequences of that could potentially be wide-reaching as well, in many different ways beyond just simply creating a diverse talent pool, but actually in terms of the impact of the work that we do, the innovations that we create, and the harm or not that we do with them. So yeah, I can completely see where Quinn is coming from that perspective. And the frustration is definitely palpable, and Quinn has, I think, voiced the frustrations of many in the space very well and in no uncertain terms.
Yeah, I think it goes to show how much of politics is in communication, and actions speak very, very, very loudly. And I think in politics, words, especially placating words, carry very little meaning. And it's if Quinn's quote here, right, because of the shift on capital gains, the entrepreneurs relief, carried interest, our government has sent a clear message that it does not prioritize our innovators. So that's what Quinn is saying. He's saying that these actions have communicated to me that I am not valued. Quinn, as someone who has created Okabio, created jobs for like 100, will be hundreds of people by the end of that company's growth, driving the economy, driving the biotech sector, transferring science into technology, into business, and into tangible benefit to the country. Like, it's completely reasonable that someone can feel that way based on those actions. And I'm also fully aware that that's slightly at odds with what I said earlier about like bigger picture and all these types of things. But again, it shows that it's emotive. It is just so emotive, and it's about philosophy. And clearly, this message that has been sent by these actions communicate a philosophy that is at odds with where Quinn is and how Quinn feels. And I think that's your classic left versus right philosophy, isn't it? But yeah, it's well, depends where you view central, to be honest, and that's a whole nother question of what is centrist politics these days. That's a very confusing place to try and be. But yeah, it's interesting. And Quinn finishes here. I'm curious to see how vague promises of research investment will offset our best and brightest crossing the pond. I think, yeah, if you look at the way that employees are incentivized with LTIPs and things in the US, and their structure for shares and all the rest of it, so many of my friends say this is just better. It's just better over there, the way that it's done. I think there is a lot that we can learn from that. I think, though, it depends whether your average person understands that enough to go, I am leaving the UK because, rather than just putting up with it. And the more that we just put up with things, and we know this in healthcare, don't we? The people listening who have been in healthcare, the more that we just put up with it, we put up with the conditions, we put up with all this stuff, there's no incentive to change it. And so actually people do need to vote with their feet. If this is enough for you to leave, cause the pain. And actually then things might change. But I wonder, this is people's home at the end of the day. People are just going to end up putting up with quite a lot, having the amount in our pockets eroded away for various reasons. And yeah, I do wonder on these things. But it's a very, very, very big picture, and this is part of it. So I guess we'll see. We'll see where we are in a couple of years' time.
I feel like this podcast has turned into politics podcasts.
Yeah,
over the last
amateur
few
hour
weeks,
of politics.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Politics for dummies, definitely. We are the
By
dummies. Our
dummies,
audience
yeah.
is definitely not. And I mean, I can't promise it ends here because, as I said, it's the US election next week, and I am super interested in, well, just seeing how that plays out, but also exploring what the implications of that might be for us this side of the pond, but also for innovation, for health tech, for healthcare. We often see the US setting the agenda for global conversations and global initiatives. So, yeah, it will be an interesting one. That happens next Tuesday, doesn't it? So, yeah, perfect timing for us to gather our thoughts, gather some perspectives, and bring that to you next week.
Cool. Well, if you want to grab, that sifted article we started with, if you want to grab that, you want to grab any of the other stories in Pigeon this week, you can head to healthtechpigeon.com and you can sign up to the newsletter, which hits your inbox every single Sunday. We have been Health Tech Pigeon, and thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week.